The master of prayer, the one who was a master of prayer, he devoted all his time to prayers and to songs extolling God. Though he lived outside of civilization, he entered it frequently. On such occasions, he would knock on someone's door, usually someone of low status, such as a pauper or the likes, and sit down and speak to his heart about the ultimate purpose of existence, saying that in truth there is no purpose at all to existence besides serving God one's entire lifetime, spending one's life praying to God and singing songs extolling Him.
אומנם מי שרוצה לדבר בחברות בירת שמיים בעיניי, יותר שיהיה לו ירת שמיים, כדי שיהיו דברים משמעותית חברו, כמו שאמרו רבים סיפור כל מי שיש לו ירת שמיים, ברב נשמע. ויחד לי שקיימו ברב ושל חברו, ולפעמים לדבר אחד עם חברו, ובפרשים מיד, עובר והולך על אימון ולפעמים, אבל אני כאן מחוץ לה, לכן צריך לזה ירת שמיים, כי מי שירת כדור קודם לחברו, טוב מתקיים.
אוי nanach, nachman meuman, nanach nachma nachman meuman. He's spending one's life praying to God and singing songs extolling Him. He would speak at length to this person with such inspiring words until his message. He would speak at length to this person with such inspiring words until his message penetrated the person's heart, and he desired to become his follower. As soon as this happened, he would take him and lead him to his place outside of civilization. Now this master of prayer had chosen a place outside of civilization, next to a river, near which grew trees, whose fruit they would eat. The clothing war was not an issue at all. He entered civilization, frequently inspiring and persuading people to serve God and to follow his way of devoting oneself to prayers, etc. Whoever was willing to follow him, he would take with him and lead to his place outside of civilization. There they would devote themselves completely to prayers, to songs extolling God, to confessions, fasts, self-mortifications, penance, and the likes. He gave them his compositions of prayers, songs of extolling. He gave him his compositions of prayers, songs of extolling. And confessions. And they devoted all their time to this. Eventually, among these people that he had brought out, there were those who became capable of bringing others close to the service of God, and he would then allow them to enter civilization, to get involved with this project of bringing people closer to God. The master of prayer himself was always involved in this, gathering followers and bringing them outside of civilization. Eventually this had an impact, and word of what was happening began to spread. People suddenly began to disappear from civilization, and no one knew what had happened to them. Once someone's son went lost and could not be found until eventually it became known that this master of prayer is going around persuading people to serve God. But they were unable to catch him, since the master of prayer acted cleverly. He would present himself differently on each occasion. To one person he would present himself like a pauper, to another like a merchant, to another in yet a different way. And when he began speaking with that person and realized that he could not influence him overtly, he would speak to him in covert ways, so that he would not realize what his real intentions were, as if he had no intentions at all of bringing people close to God. It was impossible to realize that this was his intention, even though his entire intention in speaking with people was only this: to bring them close to God, to bring them close to God. To bring them close to God, even though His entire intention in speaking with people was only this, to bring them close to God. Even though his entire intention in speaking with people was only this, to bring them close to God. Even though his entire intention in speaking with people was only this, to bring them close to God. Even though his entire intention in speaking with people was only this, to bring them close to God. This was all he had in mind. Oh, nevertheless, when he realized that he could not influence a certain person, he would talk in circles round about in covert ways. So that the person had no way at all of understanding what his real intention was. This is what the master of prayer did until the word of it became widespread. They hoped to catch him, but it was not possible. As said, so the master of prayer and his followers lived outside of civilization, devoting themselves solely to prayers, songs extolling God, confessions, fasts, self-mortifications, and penances. As said, he also provided for each of his followers whatever that person needed. For instance, if he realized that the understanding of one of his followers was such that in order for him to serve God, he needed to go around dressed in golden clothes, he would provide this for him. On the other hand, occasionally a wealthy person became his follower and he would take him out of civilization. If he understood that this wealthy person needed to wear torn and degraded clothing, he would lead him in that direction. It was all according to his understanding of each individual's needs. That is what he provided for them. Nanach, nachman, meuman. And for these people whom he had brought close to God, fasting or intense self-mortification was more precious than all the pleasures of the world. They enjoyed the intense self-mortification of fasting more than all the pleasures of the world. Now there was this certain country in which there was great wealth. They were all wealthy. However, they had this very strange and unusual custom of arranging all their affairs according to wealth. Each individual's status was ranked according to his wealth. One who had so many thousands or tens of thousands had one status, while another who had a different amount of money had a different status. All status ranking was according to the wealth each one possessed, and the one who had a certain agreed upon amount of thousands and tens of thousands was considered their king. They also had penance. Whoever had a certain amount of money was given a certain penance flag, which conferred to him the status represented by that pennant. And whoever had a different amount of money was given a different pennant, which conferred to him the status represented by that pennant according to his wealth. It was also agreed upon among them how much money one must possess in order to be conferred with the status represented by a certain pennant, and how much money one needed to be conferred with the status of a different pennant. Each one's status and prestige was all according to his wealth, as they had agreed upon. It was also agreed upon among them that someone who only possessed a certain amount of money would only be considered a simple person. And if someone possessed even less than that, he would be considered a beast or a bird or the likes. So they had among them wild beasts and birds. For instance, when someone possessed only a certain amount of money, he was called a human lion. And the same with other wild beasts and birds. According to one's lack of money, was one considered a beast, a bird, or whatever. For the most important thing for them was money, and each one's prestige and status was according to one's wealth. Now word of this country spread throughout the world, and the master of prayer would sigh over this and say, who knows how far they can go astray. On account of this, as a result, some of the master of prayer's followers took it wholly upon themselves to travel to this country in order to bring them back to the proper path. They had great compassion on them for having gone so far astray, and the loss for money, especially since the master of prayer, even though they didn't ask permission from the master of prayer, especially they had great compassion on them for having gone so far astray in the lust for money, especially since the master of prayer had said, that they might go even much further astray. So these fathers went to this country in the hope of bringing them back to the proper path. Upon arriving there and entering the country, they sat down to speak with one of its residents, probably one of the beasts. That is, a low status person who possessed relatively little money, was called in that country a beast. They began speaking with him as was their custom. That is not the purpose at all. That this is not the purpose at all, and that the main purpose is to serve God, etc. But he paid them no attention, since he was so deeply entrenched in the belief that money is the most important thing. The same thing happened when they spoke with someone else. One of the followers was speaking to him at length. When the person he was speaking to said to him, "I have no more time to speak with you." "Why not?" he asked them. "Because we all are now about to leave this country and move to another country," he said. "As we see it, money is the most important thing. So we have agreed among us to move to that country. Since we can make a lot of money there, we will be able to mine gold and silver from the earth. So we must all go now to that country." The people of this country had also agreed among themselves to designate the status of stars and constellations. That is, if someone possesses a certain agreed upon amount of money, that he would be considered a star. Since if he possesses so much money, he must possess the power of some star. If a stars cause a gold or to form. The reason why in certain earth there is gold is because a star has caused gold dust to form in that place. Thus gold is generated by stars, and if a person possesses a certain amount of gold, he obviously possesses that power, the power of a star. So he is considered a star himself. They also agreed to designate a status of constellations. If a person will possess a certain agreed upon amount of money, he would be considered a constellation. And they also designated a status of angels, all according to the amount of money. Finally, they agreed among them to designate a status of a god. Whoever possessed a certain agreed upon huge amount of thousands and tens of thousands will be a god. Since God has blessed them with so much money, he is obviously himself a god. They put all of the above into practice. Or they also agreed that it was proper. They also agreed that it was improper for them to live in civilization and to intermingle with the rest of mankind, lest they become contaminated by them. They consider the rest of mankind contaminated compared to themselves. Thus they decided to search for themselves the tallest mountains in the world on which to live, so that they would be exalted above the atmosphere of the world. They sent out scouts in search of tall mountains, and they found very tall mountains. The entire population of this country then went to settle there on these tall mountains. On each of these mountains, a group of this country's population settled. They built heavy fortifications around each mountain. There were deep ditches and the likes around the mountain, so that it was totally impossible for anyone to reach them. There was only one hidden path to the mountain, so that no outsider would be able to reach them. They made such fortifications around each mountain. They also had guards stand watch at a distance from the mountain, so that no outsider would come close. And they, dwelling on these mountains, continued to live according to their above custom. They had many gods, each one according to his wealth. But since money was so important to them that a huge amount of money would render a person a god, the gods lived in fear of murder and robbery. Any one of them might murder or rob in order to attain the status of a god. By virtue of the stolen money, in practice though, people said to themselves, since this person is a god, he will be protected from robbery and murder. They instituted services and sacrificial offerings. They sacrificed and prayed to the gods. They also brought human sacrifices. They would sacrifice themselves to a god in order to merge with it, and to then be reincarnated as a wealthy person. Their religion was based upon money. Various services, sacrifices, and incense were offered to these gods. Various services, sacrifices, and incense were offered to these gods. Yet the country was still full of murder and robbery, for whoever did not believe in these and these efficacy of these services, murdered or robbed in order to acquire wealth, since money was the most important thing for them. With money one could acquire any type of food or clothing. Human life is based upon money, according to their distorted and confused thinking. Human life is based upon money. With money one could acquire any type of food or clothing. Human life is based upon money according to their distorted and confused thinking. And money was thus their religion. They endeavored that there never be a shortage of money in their country. Such money was the religion and their God. On the contrary, they endeavored to increase their money supply by bringing more into the country from outside sources. Merchants would go out to deal in other countries in order to earn money and bring it back to the country. Giving charity was obviously for them severely prohibited, since one thereby forfeits the blessing of money that God has given to him, since having money is the most important thing, and in this way one is decreasing and forfeiting one's money. Therefore it was firmly forbidden for them to give charity. They also appointed officials to ascertain that each individual possessed the amount of money that he claimed. Each one had to occasionally present proof of his wealth in order to maintain his status that he had been given. According to the amount of his wealth, sometimes a beast became a human, or a human became a beast. That is, if one lost some of his money, he might be demoted from a human to a beast, since he now lacked enough money. And the same for the opposite. If one earned more money, one would be promoted from a beast to a human. And the same for all of the levels. Statues and portraits were made of their gods. Each and every of them, he possessed these statues and would hug and kiss them, for this was their religion and faith. Now the upright followers of the Master of Prayer returned home and told the Master of Prayer about the great mistake and foolishness of this country, how they are so entrenched in the lust of money, how they move from one place to another, and how they make stars and constellations, how they move from one place to another, and how they make stars and constellations. The Master of Prayer interjected that he is afraid that they will go astray even further. Then he was told that they have established gods for themselves, and he said that this was what he was afraid of from the beginning. Now the Master of Prayer had great compassion on them and decided that he would go there himself. Perhaps he might be able to get them to see their mistake. So the Master of Prayer went there himself and reached the guards who were standing around the mountain. The guards were obviously people of lower ranking, who were allowed to be exposed to the atmosphere of this world. For anyone who possessed some status on account of his money was not allowed at all to intermingle with people from the outside world, or to be exposed to the atmosphere of this world, so that they not be contaminated. They were not allowed at all to speak with people from the outside world, so that they not become contaminated by the air of their breath. Thus the guards who stood outside the city were certainly people of low rank. But even the guards possessed the statues, and they repeatedly hugged and kissed them, because for them as well money was the central point of faith. So the Master of Prayer went over to one of the guards and began speaking with him about the ultimate purpose, saying that serving God is the ultimate goal. Torah study, prayer, good deeds, etc. And money is foolishness, not the ultimate purpose at all. But the guard paid him no attention, for he was already long sunken into the belief that money is the most important thing. So the Master of Prayer went over to another god and spoke with him as above, but neither and spoke with him as above, but neither, and spoke with him as above, but neither did he pay him any attention. He went around to all the guards, but none of them paid him any attention. So the Master of Prayer decided to enter the city. That was on top of the mountain. When he reached there, they were amazed, since it was impossible for anyone to enter. As said earlier, so they asked him, "How did you get in here?" "Since I'm already here," he said. "What's the difference? How I got here? So why are you asking?" And he began speaking one of them about the ultimate purpose. But he paid him no attention. The same happened with another one, and with all of them, for they were all sunken in their mistake. But it was quite astonishing to the residents of the city that some stranger had come along and was speaking to them such ideas that contradicted their faith. Or they began to sense that perhaps this person is the master of prayer, for they had already heard that there is a master of prayer like this in the world. The word of the master of prayer had already spread throughout the world. He was called the pious master of prayer. But it was impossible to recognize him and capture him, since he was always appearing in a different form to each person. But it was impossible to recognize him, or to recognize and capture him, since he was always appearing in a different form to each person. To one he would appear as a merchant, and to another as a pauper, and then he would disappear from that place. Now around this time, a mighty warrior, together with many other warriors, what gathered around him was going around conquering countries. All he wanted was surrender. When the people of the country surrendered themselves to him, he let them be. Otherwise, he destroyed them. Thus he went around conquering, not even wanting any money. Just surrender, that they would be subjugated to him. He would send ahead his warriors to a country to surrender to him while he was still over 100 miles away. That is how he conquered countries. The merchants from this country of wealth, who had gone to other countries to do business, returned to their country and told people about this warrior. A terror fell upon them, although in essence they were willing to surrender to him. Their having heard that he loves money and is not interested in money at all contradicted their faith, and it was thus impossible for them to surrender to him. For them this would be like apostasy, since he does not believe at all in their faith in money. As a result, they were very afraid of him. They began to offer services and sacrifices to the gods. They would take a beast that is someone with little money who was considered by them a beast, and offer him as a sacrifice to their gods, and other such services. Nanach, nachman. Meanwhile, this warrior was steadily coming closer to them. So he sent his warriors on ahead to ask them what they wanted, as was his way. They were terrified. They were terrified and did not know what to do. They were terrified and did not know what to do. Some of their own merchants said that that they had been to a certain country, which all of its residents are gods, and that they travel with angels. In other words, every single person in that country, from the smallest to the greatest, are all extraordinarily wealthy, to the extent that even the smallest among them is considered a god by their mistaken standards. That is, the smallest among those in that other country is so wealthy that he possesses the fixed amount of money that would make him a god in the country. And they travel with angels, since horses are covered with such great wealth of gold, etc. That is, the covering of one horse is worth the amounts that would make one an angel by their standards. As the riders travel with angels, they travel by 3 pairs of angels to a carriage and travel with them. Thus they must send to this country, for surely they will be able to assist them, since all residents of that country are our gods. All this was their merchants' advice, yet he appealed to the people very much, for they believed that they would surely be rescued by them, since they were all gods. And then, he appealed to the people very much, for they believed that they would surely be rescued by them, since they were all gods. And the master of prayer decided that he would go again to this country. Perhaps he could still succeed in getting them to acknowledge this mistake of theirs. So he went and reached the gods, and began speaking with one of them, as was his way. The god told him about this warrior, and that they are terrified of him. The master of prayer asked him, "And what do you want to do about it?" The god told him about the above advice they want to send to this country where they are all gods. The master of prayer laughed at him heartily and said, that is all great foolishness. The residents of that country are only human beings like us. All of you, including your gods, are only human beings and not God. There is only one in the world. There is only one in the world. There is only one in the world. There is only one one in the world. There is only one in the world. There is only one. There is only one in the world. There is only one in the world. There is only one in the world. Who is the Creator? And Him alone is it fitting to worship, and to Him is it fitting to pray. And Him alone is fitting to worship. Is it fitting to worship? To Him is it fitting to pray. This is the ultimate purpose. These are the types of ideas that the Master of Prayer said to the God, but the God did not accept His words, since the mistaken belief was already long sunken within them. Yet the Master of Prayer continued to speak with them until finally the God said, and anyway, what can I do? I'm just a single person, and all the residents of the country outnumber me. The Master of Prayer found some solace in this response, for he understood that his words had begun to penetrate into the God's ears. What he had said to the God in their first conversation and what he had said now were merging together to make an impact on his heart. They were beginning to rouse some doubt and slightly sway his mind, as could be sensed from his response. Thus the Master of Prayer went on to his second guard and spoke to him as above, but he too did not accept his words. But eventually, he too responding as the first one, I am just a single person against all the residents, etc. In the end, all of the guards gave this response. The Master of Prayer then entered the city and began to speak to them, as was his way, that they are all in great mistake, that this is not the purpose at all, that the ultimate purpose is only Torah study, prayer, etc. But they did not accept his words, for they were all deeply entrenched in this for a long time. And they told him about the warrior and that they want to send to this country where they are all gods. He laughed at them and told them how foolish that is, that they are only humans, etc., and that they will not be able to ever help them ever at all. For you are only human and they are only human and not God at all. There is only one who is God, etc. And regarding the warrior, he said to them as a rhetorical question, can this be the warrior? That is the one I know. But they did not understand what he meant to say with this. So he continued on from one to another, speaking in this way, saying to each one regarding the warrior, is this not the warrior? Is this not the warrior? But no one understood what he meant. Meanwhile, a great commotion broke out in the city, that someone was speaking in this way, making fun of their beliefs, saying that there is only one, etc., and saying about the warrior as above. They understood that this must be the Master of Prayer, since he was already well known to them. So orders were given to catch him. And though he is always appearing to them in different ways, such as once as a merchant, then as a pauper, as above. They knew about this as well, that the Master of Prayer is always changing his appearance. So orders were given to be on the lookout for him and to catch him. A search went out for him, and eventually they caught him and brought him in front of the ministers. They began talking with him, but he told them the same things as above, that they are all in great mistake and full of foolishness, and that this is not the purpose at all, that money is not the purpose at all, but that there is only one who is the Creator, etc., and that the people of that country that they say are all gods will not be able to help them, since they are only human beings. But they considered him insane, since all of the country's residents were so sunken in the mistake of money that anyone who spoke against their mistaken ideas was considered insane. They asked him, but what is this you say about the warrior? Is this not the warrior? I was once with a certain king, he answered, and one of his warriors went lost. So if this is that warrior, then I know him. Furthermore, you're trusting that country on the assumption that they are all gods is foolishness, for they will not be able to help you. And in my opinion, if you rely on them, it will be your downfall. How do you know? They asked him. Since the king with whom he had been, he said, had a hand. That is, he possessed a picture of a hand with 5 fingers, and with all the lines that are on the hand. Now this hand was like a map of all the worlds, and of everything in existence, since the time of the creation of heaven and earth until the end of time, and even of what will be afterwards. Everything was depicted on this hand, and the lines of this hand depicted the configuration of each and every world, with all of its details, just like it would be depicted the lines formed images of letters, just like on a map. where letters are written next to each and every place, to know what that place is, that here is such and such a city, and here is such and such a river, etc. In exactly the same way, the lines of the hand form images of letters next to each and every place, depicted on the hand, in order to know what it is representing. And the details of all countries, cities, rivers, bridges. The details of all mountains, cities, rivers, bridges, mountains, bridges, mountains, bridges, mountains, etc. And all other individual things were all depicted on the lines of this hand, and next to each item were letters saying that this and this, and this is that this is this and this is that. Also all the people who go around in any country, including all their experiences, were all depicted there. All the roads from one country to another, from one place to another, were also all depicted there. That's how I knew how to get into this city, something that no one else would be able to do. And if you want to send me to any city, I know the way how to get there by way of this hand. The path from one world to another was also depicted there. There are paths and ways along which one can ascend from earth to heaven. For the reason why it is impossible to ascend to the heavens, because we don't know the way. But on this hand was depicted the way to ascend to heaven, and on this hand are depicted all the paths between one world and another. Elijah, for instance, ascended to heaven along one path, which was written on this hand, while Moses ascended to heaven along a different path, which was also written on this hand. And Enoch ascended to heaven along yet a different path, and this too was written on this hand. And similarly, all the paths between one world and another were all depicted on the lines of this hand. Also depicted on this hand was each and everything as it was at the time of creation, as it is right now, and as it will be in the future. For instance, Sodom was depicted as it had been during its settlement before it was overturned, the overturning of Sodom. As it was being overturned, were also depicted on this hand. And the depiction of Sodom after its overturning was also therefore depicted on this hand, with the past, the present, and the future. Nanach, nachma, nachman, meuman, nanach, nachman, asreini v'tayv chelkeini, so I also saw on this hand that this country about which you say that they are all gods, together with all the people who stand there for the far distance, together with all the people, together with all the people who send to them for assistance. They will all be wiped out and disappear. And this was what the master of prayer told them. They were very amazed by what he said, for they sensed that he was obviously telling the truth. Since anything can be depicted on a map, they realized he was telling the truth, because two lines on the hand can be connected to form a letter. Since anything can be depicted on a map, they realized that he was telling the truth, because two lines on the end of heaven can be connected to form a letter. Because two lines on the end of hand can be connected to form a letter. Thus they realized that he could not have made up the whole story. So they were very amazed by what he said. And where is the king? They asked him. Maybe he can show us a way to make money. You still want money? He said to them. Don't talk to me about money at all. Still, where is the king? They asked again. Still, where is the king? They asked again. I don't know myself where he is, but I can tell you the story. There was once a king and a queen who had an only daughter. When she came of age, they gathered a council of wise men to advise them to whom it would be appropriate to marry her off. I was there among that council. Since the king liked me very much, my advice was that he marry her off to the warrior. Since this warrior had done good things for us and had conquered many countries, so it was fitting to give him the princess for a wife. since so it was fitting to give him the princess for a wife. My advice was well taken, and everybody agreed with him. There was great joy over having found a bridegroom for the princess. And so they married her off to the warrior, and eventually she gave birth. The baby was extremely handsome. His beauty was not human at all. His hairs were golden, but among them were also the entire spectrum of colors. His face shined like the sun, but among them were also the entire spectrum of colors. His face shined like the sun, and his eyes were luminaries on their own. And this baby was born with fully developed consciousness, intelligence, consciousness. As soon as he was born, they immediately saw that he had mature understanding, sensed that when people were talking, he would laugh when laughter was appropriate, and other such things. In short, they saw that he possessed full-grown consciousness, though he still lacked the ability to make the subtle movements of an adult necessary to speak, or the likes. That the king also had an orator, that is a speaker who is an expert in eloquence and rhetoric. He was able to compose. He was able to compose. Amazingly succinct sayings and poems in praise of the king. The orator was a naturally talented orator, but the king showed him a way to develop the art of rhetoric, by way of which he really became a truly amazing orator. The king also had a sage. The sage was also a sage by his own merits, but the king showed him a way how he could develop and attain more wisdom, and in this way he became a truly amazing sage. Similarly, the warrior was a warrior in his own right, but the king showed him a way to develop and become even mightier, and in this way he became a truly wondrous and awesome warrior. For there is a sword that hangs in midair, and the sword has 3 powers. When the sword is lifted, all opposing army generals flee for their lives, inevitably causing the enemy's downfall. For when the generals flee, and there is no one to lead the battle, there is no way that the army can wage war, but yet survivors may be able to regroup and battle. For this, the sword has 2 edges, each edge with a specific power. One side causes the entire army to fall, and the other side causes them to become emaciated, leaving their bodies gaunt and debilitated. Simply by moving the sword in a certain way, wherever it is, the enemies are stricken in the above way by each side accordingly. The king showed the warrior how to get to this sword, and that is from where he attained such great might. I to attain what I need for my skills, by the king showing me how to acquire it. The king also had a faithful friend. The king also had a faithful friend. He and the king had such a close friendship, such a wondrously awesome mutual bond, that it was completely impossible for them to go without seeing each other for an extended time. And though there were times when they had to separate for a while, they each had a picture of them together, and they would enjoy looking at these pictures. When they were separated from each other, these pictures were paintings of the king and his faithful friend, showing their great love for each other, hugging and kissing each other with deep fondness. These pictures had the effect upon whoever looked at them to be overcome by very great love. Now this faithful friend also attained the love from where the king showed him he could acquire it. Now this faithful friend also attained the love from where the king showed him he could acquire it. A time came when all of the above went, each one to the place each one to the place from where he acquired his power, the orator, the warrior, and all the other kings, man, each of them ascended to his source to renew his power. But just at that time, there was a very mighty storm wind in the world. This storm wind scattered everything in the entire world, transforming sea to dry land to sea, wilderness settlement, and settlement to wilderness. It overturned the entire world. This storm wind entered the king's palace, and though it did no damage, as it went through, it carried away the child of the princess in the midst of the commotion. As soon as the storm wind carried away the precious baby, the princess ran after him, as did the queen and king as well. They all scattered, and no one knows where they are. None of us were there at the time, since we had each gone up to his place to renew his power. When we returned, we found none of them. The ant also went lost at that time. And after that, we all scattered about. Since then, we are each unable to go to his place to renew his power. Since after the entire world was overturned and all places were exchanged, I see the dry land, etc. It is certainly impossible to go up along the original paths, since we now need different paths appropriate for the new locations of the places. Therefore, we have been unable to return to each of our places to renew our powers. However, the remaining effects upon each of us are also very great. So if this mighty warrior is the king's warrior, then he is certainly a very mighty warrior indeed. Mighty warrior indeed. All this was the master of prayer. All this was what the master of Torah told the people. All this was what the master of prayer told the people. All this was what the master of prayer told the people. Oh, yeah. Was what the master of prayer told the people. People were very amazed by what the master of prayer said. They held him in custody, and would not allow him to leave them, just in case the warrior coming their way was indeed the warrior whom the master of prayer knew. Nanach, nachma, nachman, meuman, nanach, nachman, meuman. Now the warrior was continuously approaching, sending ahead his messengers again and again. Finally he reached the city and encamped right outside. He again sent his messengers to them. They were terrified, and they requested of the master of prayer to advise them. The master of prayer told them that in order for him to know if he is that warrior, the king's warrior, he must know the ways and behaviors of this warrior. So the master of prayer went out himself to the warrior. Nanach, nachman. He arrived in the warrior's camp. He arrived in the warrior's camp, and began. He arrived in the warrior's camp and began speaking with one of the warriors, that is, with one of his gods, in order to ask about the warrior. The master of prayer asked him, "What do you do for this warrior? And how did you gather about him?" "It happened this way," he answered. The master of prayer. It happened this way, he answered the master of prayer. As written in our chronicles, there had been a great storm wind in the world that overturned the entire world. Transforming, huh?
Ask for me too.
Huh?
Ask for me too.
No.
Ah.
It happened this way. Oh, it happened this way. Answer the master prayer as written in our chronicles. There had been a great storm wind in the world that overturned the entire world, transforming sea to dry land, and dry land to sea, wilderness to settlement, etc., overturning the entire world. After the storm and upheaval that overturned the entire world, the world's people decided to appoint for themselves a king. They debated whom should they say. They debated whom should they appoint king over them. Their conclusion was that since the most important thing is the ultimate purpose of life, so whoever devotes himself the most to the ultimate purpose shall be king. But then they began discussing what the ultimate purpose is, and they were split into groups over this issue. One group said that the ultimate purpose is honor. We see they said that honor is the most important thing for people. When a person is not given honor, that is when someone says to him something disrespectful, his experience is as if he has been murdered. This is because honor is the most essential. This is because honor is the most essential thing in people's lives. People are particular to give honor even to the dead, to bury a person honorably and the likes. And during a funeral, we say to the dead person that whatever is being done for him is being done for his honor. This is despite the fact that after death, the deceased has no need for money or any type of desire. But yet, people are particular to honor the dead. Thus honor is the ultimate purpose. And this group tried to prove their point with other such arguments, confused and foolish arguments. That is, the same applies for all the other groups discussed below. They all had many arguments to prove the confusion and foolish point. Some of them are presented below, but the rebbe did not want to present all of the confused arguments for these beliefs. For some of the arguments are so confusing that one can indeed be convinced by these false ideas. So this group agree that the ultimate purpose is honor. So they must seek an honorable person who also pursues honor. That is, that he pursues honor and attains it. Such a person is honorable, for he possesses honor. Since he is an honorable person, since he possesses honor and pursues it, thereby promoting human nature, which desires honor. Therefore this person has devoted himself to the ultimate purpose and has attained it, for the ultimate purpose is honor. All this was their foolish and confused opinion. Therefore such a person deserves to be king. So they went to seek such a person. Eventually they came across people carrying around an elderly beggar. About 500 people were following him. They were all gypsies, and this man too was a gypsy. This beggar was blind, hunchbacked, and mute, but all of these people followed him since they were all members of his family, his sisters, his brothers, his descendants, whom together amounted to this entire tribe that followed him and carried him around. He was very particular about his honor. He was very particular about his honor. He was a very cantankerous man. He was very particular about his honor. He was a very cantankerous man. He was a very cantankerous man, always getting peeved with them over some other great pettiness, always getting peeved with them over some other great pettiness. He was always ordering that that other people should carry him, and would then get infuriated with them. So this elderly beggar is a very honorable person, since Since he has so much honor, he also pursues honor. Since he is so particular over his honor, thus this group found this beggar to be their ideal, and they made him their king. And since geography has an influence, while one country engenders and nurtures honor, while a different country engenders a different trait, therefore this group that had decided among themselves that honor is the ultimate purpose sought a country that engenders honor. They found such a country and settled there. A different group argued that honor is not the ultimate purpose, and they came to the conclusion that murder is the ultimate purpose, that murder is the ultimate purpose. This is because we see that all living things wither and die. Everything that lives on earth, grasses, plants, humans, and everything eventually withers and dies. Thus the ultimate purpose of everything is withering and dying. Therefore the murderer who murders and causes people to die, he is thus bringing the world closer to its purpose. So they agree that the ultimate purpose is murder. They went in search of someone who was a murderer, an especially angry and vengeful person. For such a person is closer to the purpose, according to their perverted ideas. Such a person deserves to be king. Such a person is closer to the purpose, according to their perverted ideas. Such a person deserves to be king. As they were searching, they heard screaming. What is this screaming? They asked. They were told that this screaming was on account of someone having murdered his parents. Is there a more courageous and angry murderer than this? But they all said, who murders his own father and mother, this man has attained the ultimate purpose. So being that he was their ideal, they made him their king. And they too sought a land that engenders murder. And they found a hilly area where murderers hang out. And they moved there and settled there with their king. But another group argue that someone who possesses a bountiful plenty of food, but does not eat normal human staple, but only refined foods, such as milk, so that his mind not become coerced, should be king. They were unable, however, to find someone who does not eat the normal human staples. So as an interim measure, they chose a wealthy person who possessed a bountiful plenty of food until they would find someone according to their ideal, which was someone who did not eat the normal human staple, which was someone who did not eat the normal human staple. So in the meantime, they made this wealthy person king, until they would find such a person, at which time the wealthy person would abdicate the throne, and they would make this other person king. They too chose a land that engenders this, and they went and settled there. Another group argued that a beautiful woman should be king, for the ultimate purpose is that mankind should propagate over the earth, since that is the very reason for which the world was created. Since a beautiful woman rouses the sexual urge for the propagation of mankind on earth, she thus engenders the ultimate purpose. Therefore a beautiful woman should be king. So they chose a beautiful woman, and she became their king. They chose a land that engenders beauty, and they went and settled there. And another group argued that the ultimate purpose is speech. This is because the superiority of man over animals is speech, and since this is the main superiority of man, therefore this must be the ultimate purpose. So they sought a man who is a speaker, someone who can speak eloquently and who knows many languages and is always speaking a lot. Such a person is close to the ultimate purpose. They went and found a French lunatic who was going around talking to himself, They asked him if he knows any languages, and in fact he did. So according to their perverted ideas, this man had attained the ultimate purpose, since he spoke eloquently, knew many languages, and spoke a lot, for he spoke even to himself. Thus this man was their ideal, and they accepted him as king. They chose a land that is conducive of their purposes, and they went and settled there with their king. We can assume that he guided them along the proper path. Yet another group argued that the ultimate purpose is joy. Proof is that when a baby boy is born, we rejoice. At a wedding, we rejoice. When a country conquers another, they rejoice. Thus the ultimate purpose of everything must be joy. Therefore they sought someone who was always rejoicing. Since he is close to the ultimate purpose, since he is close to the ultimate purpose, since he is close to the ultimate purpose, he would be the... Since he is close to the ultimate purpose, since he is close to the ultimate purpose, he would be the king. Since he is close to the ultimate purpose, he would be their king. They went and found a Gentile going. They went and found a Gentile going around with their dirty shirts and carrying a bottle of alcohol. Several other Gentiles were following him. This Gentile was very happy, for he was very drunk. They saw how happy this Gentile was, how he had no worries at all. So this Gentile was their ideal, for he had attained the ultimate purpose of joy. They made him their king, and we can assume that he guided them along the proper path. They chose a land that engenders their purpose, an area of vineyards and the likes, from which they would make wine and alcohol from the seeds, that nothing goes to waste. For the ultimate purpose for them is to drink, get drunk, and to always be happy. And even though this had absolutely no connection with the joy they were actually seeking, for they had nothing to be happy about. And even though they had absolutely no connection with the joy they were actually seeking, for they had nothing to be happy about. Nevertheless, they felt that simply being happy for no reason brought them to the ultimate purpose. They chose a land that engenders this, and went and settled there. Another group nachman, meuman. Another group argued that wisdom is the most important thing. They saw, they chose the land that engenders this and went and settled there. Another group argued that wisdom is the most important thing. They sought a very wise person and made him their king. Another group argued that wisdom is the most important thing. They sought a very wise person and made him their king. They sought a very wise person and made him their king. Sought a land that is conducive of wisdom, and went and settled there. Another group argued that the ultimate purpose was to provide the body with proper food and drink for the purpose of bodybuilding. They sought someone who was well built, whose muscles were very large, and he exercised to enlarge them. For since he had such a large body, he has a larger portion in the world. Since he takes up more space, and he is closer to the ultimate purpose, which is bodybuilding, such a person should be king. So they went and found a tall person who was their ideal. For someone with a large body is close to the ultimate purpose, and they made him king. They sought a land. They sought a land. They sought a land that is conducive of this. Nanach, nachman. Seforim that is conducive of this. And they went and settled there. Then there was another group that argued that all the above is not the ultimate purpose. Rather, the ultimate purpose is only to devote oneself to pray to God, to be humble, etc. They sought a master of prayer and made him their king. The astute, then there was another group that argued that all the above is not the ultimate purpose. Rather, the ultimate purpose is only to devote oneself to prayer, to God, to be humble, etc. Or they sought a master of prayer and made him their king. The astute reader will realize that all of the first groups were completely mistaken in very great perversions, and only this last group had hit on the truth. Fortunate are they. Oh yeah, this was what this warrior had told the master of prayer. Oh, he also told him that the warriors who had gathered around the warrior, are from the group of the bodybuilders who had taken the one with the large body as a king. One day a division of these warriors was following the army with wagons, carrying food, drink, etc. Oh, now these well-bodied men certainly imposed a fear upon people, for they were large and mighty men, and whoever encountered them would no doubt step off the road. So as these troops were moving along, a certain warrior came along from the opposite direction. This was the warrior who was now with them, and this warrior did not step off the road as he approached the troops. Rather, he walked straight into the middle of the troops and dispersed them in all directions. The soldiers were terrified of him. Meanwhile, he went into the wagons that had been following the troops and ate everything that was there. The warriors were absolutely amazed at his great might, that he was not afraid at all of the troops and had walked straight into their midst. Oh, and eaten everything in the wagons, so they immediately prostrated themselves before him and declared, "Long live the king!" They realized that such a warrior deserves to be king, according to their belief that the ultimate purpose is bodybuilding. They realized that such a warrior deserves to be a king, according to their belief that the ultimate purpose is bodybuilding. Their own king would certainly hand him over the kingship. Since a warrior with such a well-built body like this, who deserves to be king, had been found, and indeed that is what happened. The warrior was taken to be king over this group, and concluded this soldier, he is the warrior whom we are now following to conquer the world. But our warrior king says that he has a hidden intention in going around conquering the world. His intention is not at all that the world should be under his dominion, but he has a hidden intention. All the above was what the warrior guard had told the master of prayer, who had asked him how they had become the warrior's followers, and what is the nature of your warrior king's might. Asked the master of prayer. There was once a certain country, answered the warrior, that did not want to surrender to him. So the warrior took his sword, which has 3 powers. When it is lifted, all the army generals flee, etc. The 3 powers mentioned above. The master of prayer heard that. He realized that this is indeed the warrior of the king. So the master of prayer asked for an audience with the warrior, who was the king. They told him that they would inform the warrior and ask him, if he would grant permission. They went to ask him, and he gave permission for him to come. When the master of prayer entered before the warrior, they recognized each other and were ecstatic over the privilege of meeting once again. But remembering the king and his men, they also wept, thus rejoicing and weeping together. The master of prayer and the warrior exchanged stories, what each of them had been through until they reached where they now were. The warrior told the master of prayer that after the storm wind, when everyone had dispersed, when he had returned from his place to where he had gone to renew his power, and he found that the king and all his men were not there. He went on his own way. He came across all of the king's men. He understood that he had been where each of them had been. In other words, when he came to a certain place, he understood that the king had certainly been there, but he was unable to search for and find him. Similarly, when he came to a different place, he realized that the queen had been there, but he was unable to search for and find her. The same happened with each of the king's men. Whoever said the warrior king, I did not come across you. However, said the warrior king, I did not come across you. That is the place where he had been. But I, said the master of prayer, came across all of them, including the place where you had been, where when I passed through a certain place, I saw the king's crown, and I understood that the king had certainly been there. But I was unable to search for and find him. When I passed through a different place, I came across an ocean of blood, and I understood that this ocean is certainly from the tears of the queen, who was weeping over this whole story. The queen was certainly there, but it was impossible to search for and find her. Then I came across an ocean of milk, and I understood that this ocean was from the milk of the princess, whose son went lost. Excess milk pressured her, and that is what created this ocean of milk. The princess had certainly been there, but it was impossible to search for and find her. Then I continued on and saw the baby's golden hair scattered about. I did not take any of them, but I knew that the baby had certainly been there, but it was impossible to search for and find him. And I continued on and passed by an ocean of wine. I knew that this ocean was certainly made for the words of the orator, who stands before the king and queen and consoles them, and then turns around and consoles the princess. These words create the ocean of wine. As written, your palate is like good wine. Song of Songs 7:10. However, I wasn't able to find him. I continued on and saw a stone upon which was engraved a depiction of the hand with all the lines, and I understood that the sage had certainly been there, and I understood that the sage had certainly been there. He had engraved a depiction of the hand on this stone, but it was impossible to find him. Upon continuing on, I came to a mountain on which I saw golden tables, display cupboards, and the rest of the king's treasures arranged. I understood that the treasurer had certainly been there, but it was impossible to find him. I had to pass through all these places, said the warrior king, but I took some of the baby's golden hairs. I took 7 hairs that represent the entire spectrum of colors, and I treasured them. I stayed where I had been. I stayed where I had been and sustained myself with whatever was available, grass or whatever, until I had nothing left with which to sustain myself. Then I went on my way, but when I left my place, I forgot my bow there. I saw your bow, said the master of prayer, and I knew for sure that it was your bow, but I wasn't able to find you. The warrior king continued telling the master of prayer what happened after you had left where he had been. I'd been traveling on until I encountered these troops. I entered the camp because I had been very hungry and wanted to eat, but as soon as I came among them, they made me their king. Now I am going about conquering the world, but my intention is that perhaps I will find the king and his men. What can be done with these people? The master of prayer then asked the warrior king. He was referring to the residents of this country that had fallen into the lust for money so deeply until they had reached such foolishness of believing that wealthy people are gods in their opinion, and other such foolishnesses these people believed in. The warrior king replied to the master of prayer that he had heard from the king, or that it is possible to extract someone who has fallen into any of the lusts, but if someone has fallen into the lust for money, it is totally impossible to extract him from it. You will certainly have absolutely no influence upon him. He said, it is completely impossible to extract them from it. However, he had heard from the king that by way of the path of the sword, from where he had received his power, it is possible to extract someone who has fallen into this lust for money and even sunken into it. The master of prayer remained with the warrior king for a while, and regarding the residents of this country who had requested of the master of prayer to go out to the warrior on their behalf, they extended the time. The master of prayer convinced the warrior to extend the time for the residents of this country, so he gave them an extension of time. The warrior king and the master of prayer exchanged secret codes between them so that they would be able to keep in touch with each other. And the master of prayer went on his way, along his way. The master of prayer saw people walking along and praying, carrying books of prayers. He was frightened by them, and they were frightened by him. He stood there to pray, and they too prayed. Then he asked them, "Who are you?" At the time of the storm wind, they said, "When mankind dispersed into groups, each one chasing a different path. As explained above, we chose to constantly devote ourselves to prayer to God. We found a master of prayer and made him our king. When the master of prayer heard this, he was extremely happy. He was extremely happy. This was what he himself wanted. So he continued talking with them and revealed to them his own prayers, compositions, and his ways. His own prayers, compositions, and his ways. Upon hearing what he had to say, their eyes were open, and they realized that what a great level this master of prayer is. And they immediately made him their king, their original king, seated the throne in deference to him, since they realized at what an extraordinary level he is. The master of prayer taught them and enlightened them and made them into very great and perfect tzaddikim. They had originally also been tzaddikim, since they devoted themselves to prayer. But this master of prayer enlightened them to the point of their becoming very awesome tzaddikim. The master of prayer sent a message to the warrior king, informing him how he had found these people and become the king. Meanwhile, the people of the country of money continued to devote themselves to their old ways as above. The extension of time that the warrior king had given them was coming to end, and they were very afraid. They continued to do their services, offering sacrifices and incense, and praying to their gods. They agreed among them that they must follow their original plan of sending to the extraordinarily wealthy country all residents of which were gods, according to their understanding. They would certainly rescue them, since they were all gods. So they sent messengers to them. While these messengers were on their way, they got lost. They came across a man who was walking with a cane, and his cane was more valuable than all of their gods. His cane was studded with precious stones, and was worth more and was worth more than all the wealth of all their gods. This means both the gods of their own country and those of the country to which they were going. The cane was worth more than the wealth of them all. He was also wearing a cap studded with precious stones that was worth a great fortune. They immediately fell to the ground and prostrated themselves before him, for according to their belief, this man was God above all of their gods, since he had such extraordinary wealth. This man was actually the king's treasurer. This is unusual to you, the man asked them. Come with me and I will show you what wealth is. Nanach, nachman. So he took them to the mountain on which was arranged the king's treasury and showed them the treasure. They immediately fell to the ground and prostrated themselves, for in their eyes he was God above all gods. And the foolish and confused ideas according to which money and wealth are the main thing. However, they did not offer any sacrifices there, though according to the belief that he was a god, they should have certainly offered this god sacrifices. This was since when these messengers had been sent out, they had been warned not to offer any sacrifices along the way. If they were to offer sacrifices along the way, none of them would be left. Perhaps they might come across some treasure, or one of them might find a treasure in some outhouse, and he would thus be considered for them a god, and they would offer themselves to this god, and none of them would be left. Thus the residents of the country warned the messengers not to offer any sacrifices along the way. For this reason, they did not offer sacrifices to the treasurer, although they were sure that he was the God of all gods, so that he possessed such an awesomely great amount of wealth. The messengers then raised the question among themselves, why should they continue on to the gods? That is, to the country where they are extraordinarily wealthy and are considered by them as gavavat, for they could surely be rescued by this man, since this man is the greatest god of all. According to the perverted ideas, since he possesses such an awesomely extraordinary amount of wealth, many times everyone else's, therefore they requested this man to accompany them back to their country, and he agreed to go with them. When they returned to the country, the residents rejoiced greatly for having found such a god. They were certain he would rescue them, since he was such a god according to their opinion, for he possesses such awesome wealth. Now this man, the king's treasurer, who was accepted by the residents, of this country as a god, instructed that until changes and improvements will be made in the country, no one should offer any sacrifices. This treasurer was in fact a great tzaddik, for he was among the king's men, who were all very great tzaddikim. He certainly deeply loathed all of this despicable and foolish practices, of this country. He was unable, though, to get them to acknowledge their perverted ways. So he instructed them, in the meantime, to at least refrain from offering sacrifices. But the residents of the country began to ask him about this warrior who was camped outside. The treasurer also said, "Can this be the warrior?" So the treasurer went out to the warrior and requested of the warrior's men if it is possible to have an audience with the warrior. They said that they would inform him and ask him. So they went and asked him, and he granted permission, and the treasurer entered into his presence. They recognized each other, and there was great rejoicing and weeping between them. I am the warrior. Then said to the treasurer, "You should know that I have also met a righteous master of prayer, and that he has become a king." They also told each other how they had come to be where they now are. The treasurer told the warrior that he had passed by the king's place and the place of all his men, but he had not passed by their two places, that is, the place of the master of prayer and that of the warrior. By the two places he had not passed. The treasurer spoke with the warrior about this country that had gone so astray and become confused with such foolishness. With so much foolishness, the warrior told the treasurer what he had told the master of prayer, that he had heard from the king, that it is totally impossible to extract someone who has sunken into the lust for money, other than by way of the path of the sword, which is where the warrior gets his power from. That is the only way to get them out of it. Nanach, meuman. But they gave another extension of time. The treasurer convinced the warrior to extend the time for the country once again, so the warrior gave them another extension. The treasurer and the warrior then exchanged secret codes with each other. The treasurer then took leave of the warrior and returned to this country. The treasurer had certainly rebuked them for their perverted ways, for their being so mistaken and lost in the lust for money, but to absolutely no avail, since they were already so very sunken in it. Yet since they had now been rebuked many times by the master of prayer and by the treasurer, they were confused and said, "All right, get us out of our mistake." Though they still held fast to their ideas and were not interested at all in abandoning their perverted mistakes, they nevertheless said to those who rebuked them, "All right, if you are right, that we are very mistaken and confused. Then get us out of our mistake. Then get us out of our mistake. Treasurer advised them. The treasurer advised them that he knows from where the warrior draws his power, telling them about this sword from which the warrior gets his mighty power. So let us go together to where this sword is, and you will be able to overcome the warrior. That the treasurer's intention was that once they go there, they will be able to get out of their mistake, since the path to this sword is how one can be drawn out of the lust for money. They accepted his advice. The treasurer and leaders of the country, whom the residents of the country had chosen, those whom they considered gods, and they were certainly clad with golden and silver jewelry hanging all over them, since this was the most important thing for them. When together the treasurer sent word to the warrior that he is taking them in search of the sun, with the intention of hopefully finding the king and his men along the way. The warrior sent back a message: I will go with you as well. The warrior dressed himself in such a way that the people going with the treasure will not recognize that he is the warrior, so he disguised himself and went along with the treasure. They decided to inform the master of prayer as well. They informed him, and he too said that he would go along with them. The master of prayer went out to them, leaving behind instructions for his men to pray that God should grant them success, that they succeed in finding the king and his men. The master of prayer always pray for the yes, and he had composed prayers to be recited for this. Now although that he was going with the treasurer and the warrior in search of the king and his men, he urged his own men more than ever to pray constantly that they should find the master of prayer. I reached the treasurer and the warrior, and there was certainly great rejoicing among them, rejoicing and weeping, the three of them, the treasurer, the warrior, and the master of prayer, with the God. That is the very wealthy people of the country who were considered gods in this country. Traveled on together. After traveling in a certain direction, they reached a certain country. There were guards around the country, and they asked the guards about the nature of the country and who is their king. The guards explained to them that at the time of the storm wind, when mankind was dispersed into groups, the people of the country chose that the most important thing is wisdom, and they took a great sage as the king. But just recently they had found an extremely extraordinary sage, and the original king seated the throne, and they took the new sage as king, for wisdom is the most important thing for them. And since they had found such an extraordinary sage like this, they took him as king, the three of them. That is the treasurer, the warrior, and the master of prayer said to each other that this is probably our sage, that is the king sage. I asked if it is possible to have an audience with them, and the guards answered that they would inform him and ask him. They went and asked, and he gave permission, so the three of them came before the sage. who was his country's king, and they recognized each other, for this sage was indeed the king's sage. It was certainly great rejoicing and weeping. They wept over how they would ever find the king and all his men. They asked the sage if he knows anything about the king's hand. He told them that he has the hand, but ever since everyone was scattered by the storm wind, at which time the king and the others dispersed, he does not want to even look into the hand, for it belongs only to the king. However, he has engraved an image of the hand on the stone to use for his own personal needs, but in the hand itself he does not look at all. They spoke with the sage how he had come to where he now was. He told them that at the time of the storm wind, he went on his own way along the path, and along the way he passed by all of the king's men, except for the three of them, the master of prayer, the warrior, and the treasurer. Until the people of this country found him and took him as their king, and now he must guide them appropriately. And now he must guide them appropriately for their level, according to their wisdom, until eventually with time he will bring them to the truth. The three of them spoke with the sage about this country that had sunken so deeply into the foolishness and idolatry of money. If we had been scattered and dispersed for no other reason than to bring them back, they said to him, it would be enough for us if they had become so foolish and gone astray. In fact, though, all of the groups had gone astray and become confused and needed to be corrected, but to be brought back from their mistake and return to the true purpose of life. Even the group that chose wisdom as the purpose also did not reach the true ultimate purpose and need to be corrected and brought back, for they had chosen foreign wisdoms and heresy. Yet from all the above mistakes, it is easy to bring people back and return them to truth. But this group had strayed into the idolatry of money and became sunken in it so deeply that it is impossible to bring them back. The sage told them that he too had heard from the king that it is possible to extract someone who has fallen into any of the lusts, but it is impossible to draw out someone who has fallen into the lust of money, other than by way of the path to the sword. So the sage agreed to go along with them, and the four of them set out together these foolish gods. Also went along with them. These foolish gods also went along with them. Nanach meuman, meuman, nachma meuman, nanach meuman, nachman meuman, nanach nachma meuman, nachman meuman, nanach nachma, nachma meuman. They traveled on and reached a certain country. They traveled. These foolish gods also went along with them. They traveled on and reached a certain country. They asked the gods about the nature of the country, and they told them that after the storm wind, the people of this country chose speech as the ultimate purpose and took for themselves a speaker who knows languages as a king. But then they found another man who was an extremely extraordinary speaker of language and eloquence, and they took him as king. For the original king seated his throne him. 7 months now, there was such a speaker. The of them understood that this must certainly be their orator, that is the king's orator. And they again asked if they could have an audience with this king. The guards told them that they would inform him and give permission permission. They went and asked, and the king gave permission, and the four of them entered before the king of this country. He wasn't there, the king's orator, and they recognized each other. There was very great rejoicing and weeping among them. And now that the orator was together with them, they set out further in search. Perhaps they might find the others, that is the king, etc. They realized that God was assisting them in finding one member after another. And they attributed this to the merit of the righteous master of prayer, who was always praying for this, who was through his prayers. Who was always praying for this? Yes, they attributed this to the merit of the righteous master of prayer, who was always praying for this. It was through his prayers that they had succeeded in finding each other. So they went on in the hope that they would find the others. Which is certain, and asked about its nature and who is its king. They were told that they are from the group that had chosen joy and drink as the ultimate purpose, and had taken some drunkard as the king, since he was always happy. But eventually they found someone who was sitting in a sea of wine, and he was even more fitting in their eyes, since he was certainly an extraordinary drunkard. So they took him as king. So now too they requested an audience with them, and the guards went and received permission. And the guards went and received permission, and they entered before the king. He was the king's faithful friend, who had been sitting in the sea of wine that had been created from the consoling words of the orator. The people of this country, though, took him for a king, because they had thought that he was a great drunkard, since he sat in a sea of wine. They recognized each other, and there was great rejoicing and weeping among them. And the faithful friend, and the faithful friend went on with them. They traveled on and reached a certain country, and asked God, who is your king? Our king is a beautiful woman, the answers, and she brings. Our king is a beautiful woman, the answers, and she brings about the ultimate purpose, which is human propagation throughout the world. Originally they had some beautiful woman as king, but later they found someone who was very extraordinarily beautiful, and they took her as king. They realized that she must certainly be the princess, so they requested an audience with her. The gods went and received permission, and they entered before the queen, and rebbe recognized that she was a princess. The great rejoicing that was there was certainly beyond imagination. That was there was certainly beyond imagination. How did you get here? They asked her. She told them. She told them that after the storm wind, which had carried away the precious baby, she went out frantically and several words of him, but did not find him. The milk assured her, which created the sea of milk eventually. Eventually the people of this country found the river and took her as their queen. Found her took her as their king. There was great rejoicing among them, nanach, nachman, meuman. Though they also wept bitterly over the precious baby who had gone lost from them, and over her father and mother, whose whereabouts were unknown to her, but her husband, but the husband of the queen, of this queen, that is, the princess who had become queen in this country, had been farewelled, for the warrior was her husband. Now the country had a king, the princess, the queen of this country, then asked the master of prayer to go around in her country and purify it of this great filth. since they believed that the ultimate purpose revolves around beautiful women, they were certainly very defied in this lust. She requested the master of prayer so she requested the master of prayer to go and purify them a bit for the meanwhile, so that they refrain from indulgence in this filth for the while. For besides the actual intensity of the lust, this was like a fate for them. In that it was for them the ultimate purpose. For all of these groups that had chosen one of the various bad traits as the ultimate purpose had made a full-fledged faith out of this trait. The host, they were very sunken in this. So she asked him to go around and purify them. Somewhat to the meanwhile, all of them then went in search of the others, that is the king, etc. They came to a certain country and asked, "Who is your king?" They were told that the king is 1 year old, for they were from the group that decided that whoever possesses an abundant supply of food, and who is not sustained by normal human food, should be king. They had initially taken some wealthy man as their king, but later on they found someone who was sitting in a sea of milk, and they saw this as their ideal. This man was sustained his whole life by milk, and is not sustained by the food of the rest of the world. So they made him the king, and the reason why he's called 1 year old is because he is sustained by milk, like a child of 1 year old. 1 year old. 1 year old. They understood that this must be the baby, so they requested an audience with him. The gods went and asked and received permission when they entered his presence. They recognized each other, even he recognized them, although he had been only a small baby when he had disappeared from them. Nevertheless, because he had mature consciousness from birth, since he was born with full consciousness, he thus recognized them, and they surely recognized him. Their joy was very awesome, but they still wept, since they didn't know what happened to the king and the queen. "How did you get here?" they asked him. He told them after the storm wind had carried him away to a certain place, he remained there and sustained himself with whatever he was able to in that place. Eventually he reached this sea of milk, and he understood that this sea was definitely created from his mother's milk, for the milk was certainly pressuring her. That was how the sea came about. So he settled down in this sea of milk and was sustained by the milk, until the people of this country came along and made him their king. They continued on further and reached a certain country. They asked, "Who is your king?" People responded, the people responded that they have chosen murder as the ultimate purpose, and had taken someone murderer as a king. Later on they found a certain woman who was sitting in a sea of blood, and they took her as a king. They assumed that she was surely a very great murderer, since she is sitting in this sea of blood. They requested an audience with her, and the people went and received permission, so they entered before her. And she was the queen. She was also weeping, and her tears had become she was always weeping. She was always weeping. Ever when her tears ever become. She was always weeping, and her tears had become the sea of blood. They recognized each other, and the rejoicing was surely very great. But they still wept, since they still knew nothing about the king. So they went further on and reached a certain country. They asked, "Who is your king?" They were told that these people had chosen some honored person as a king, since honor was the ultimate purpose in their eyes. Later on they found an old man sitting in a field. We hit the crown, later on, they found an old man sitting in a field. We hit the crown on his head. He was, he was a ideal for even in a field. He was sitting with the crown, so they made him their king. They understood that this must be the king, that is their king, and they requested an audience with him. The request was made, and permission was given, and they entered before him. They recognized that indeed this was the king himself. The great rejoicing was obviously beyond imagination. The great rejoicing was obviously, the great rejoicing was obviously beyond imagination. Meanwhile, those foolish gods, meanwhile, those foolish gods, that is, those wealthy people from the wealthy country who were considered gods in their country, had been going along with them, but had no idea at all what this rejoicing is all about. But had no idea, but had no idea. And but I have no idea now what this rejoicing is about. But I have no idea at all what this rejoicing is about. And now, the holy congregation was now the holy congregation was reunited once again. So they sent on the master of prayer. So they sent on. So they sent on. The master of prayer. Nanach.
Wow, nach.
So they sent on the master of prayer to all of these countries of those groups that had chosen the various bad traits as the ultimate purpose in order to set them straight. To purify them and to get them out of their foolishness. Each country from its own foolishness, and mistake, for they were all mistaken and confused. Master of prayer, now certainly ye had the power to go to them and bring. The master of prayer now certainly had the power to go to them and bring them back, for he had been empowered by the kings of all of these countries. It's all the kings were there, each member of the king's holy congregation that was now reunited was a king over one of these countries, of those groups. So the master of prayer went with their power to purify them and bring them back. The warrior then spoke with the king about that country that had fallen into the idolatry, and to the idolatry of money. The warrior then spoke with the king about that country that had fallen into the idolatry of money. The warrior said to the king, "Have we not heard from your mouth that by way of the path to the sword, it is possible to extract those who have fallen into the idolatry of the lust for money?" "Indeed," said the king, and the king told the warrior that along that path up to the sword. There is a side path that goes past the mountain of fire, and on that mountain sits a lion. Now when this lion wants to eat, it goes and attacks the flocks and takes sheep and cattle and eats them. Shepherds know of this, and guard the sheep very carefully from it. But this does not bother the lion. But this does not bother the lion at all. Whenever it wants to eat, it attacks the flocks. The shepherds strike it and shout at it. The lion pays no attention at all. He just takes sheep and cattle for himself, roars and eats them, and this mountain of fire is invisible. A different side path leads to a kitchen. In this kitchen are all types of foods, but there's no fire in this kitchen. Instead, the foods are cooked by the fire on the mountain, and though the mountain of fire is very far from there, pipes and channels go from the mountain of fire to this kitchen, and that is how all the food is cooked. This kitchen is also invisible, but there is a way to locate it. Birds hover above this kitchen, by way of which one can know that this kitchen is there. These birds, however, hover above. These birds hover above with their wings, and that is how the fire is intensified or lowered. In other words, the birds hovering intensifies and inflames the fire, and also lowers it so that it does not blaze too much. They stir up the fire according to the foods. One type of food requires a certain fire, while a different type of food requires a different type of fire. The fire is made appropriately for the food. All this was what the king told to the warrior. So now, said the king, take them, that is, these representatives of the people who have fallen into the idolatry of money, who are gods in their country, against the wind, so that they will smell the fragrance of the food. After you give them some of the food, they will surely cast away their lust for money. The warrior did as instructed, and took these leaders of the country of wealth, who were gods in their country, for these gods were right there, having come there with the treasurer, as explained above. Now, when they had left their country with the treasurer, the countrymen had given them power of proxy and mandate, so that whatever these representatives do will be binding, and all residents of the country will be obligated to accept whatever these representatives, who were their leaders and gods, do, and will not be allowed to do otherwise. So the warrior took these people who were considered gods in their own country on account of their wealth, and led them along this path. He brought them near to the kitchen, leading them against the wind, so that the smell of the foods reached them. They began leading them against the wind, so that the smell of the foods reached them. They began to beg to be given some of these delicious foods, but then he led them with the wind. But they led them with the wind, away from the wind. Away from the wind. And they began to scream that there was a horrible odor. So he turned around and brought them against the wind. And again, the appetizing smell of the foods reached them. And again, they begged to be given some of the foods. And again, he turned around and led them with the winds, away from the wind. And again they screamed about this terrible odor. The warrior then said to them, "Don't you see that there's nothing here to cause an odor? To cause an odor, it must be that you yourselves are the source of this odor. It must be that you yourselves are the source of this odor. For this is nothing rotten here, for there is nothing rotten here, for there is nothing rotten here, for there is nothing rotten here." He then gave them some of these foods. As soon as they ate of these foods, they began to cast away their gold and silver. Each one dug for himself a pit, and buried himself in the pit out of intense disgrace. They were embarrassed upon recognizing the great stench of money, which smells literally like human excrement. This happened because they tasted the foods. They scratched their faces and buried themselves, and weren't able to lift their faces at all. Each one was embarrassed in front of the other. Money had become for them the greatest source of all disgrace, and whoever wanted to say something derogatory about another would say that he has money, for money was now a great source of disgrace. And whoever possessed more money has more disgrace, So they buried themselves out of this great disgrace. None of them was able to lift his face, even to the other, especially not to the warrior. Whoever found in his pocket another coin would immediately destroy it and quickly cast it far away. The warrior then came to them and took them out of the pits and graves. "Come with me," he said. "Now you need no longer fear the warrior, for I myself am the warrior." They asked the warrior to give them some of this food to bring back to their country. They already detested money, but they wanted that their countrymen should also get out of this lust for money. He gave them some of this food, and they took it back to their country as soon as they gave them this food. They too began, as soon as they gave them this food, they too began to cast away their silver and gold, and to bury themselves in underground tunnels out of great disgrace. They, the very wealthy and the gods, were the most disgraced, but even the lower ranking ones, who were considered wild beasts, were also disgraced for looking down upon themselves. Because they lacked money, now they realized that money is the main source of disgrace. Those foods had the effect of causing whoever ate them to detest money intensely by sensing that the stench of money is literally like human excrement. So they cast away their gods of silver and gold. After this, the master of prayer was sent to that country, and he showed them how to repent and change their ways. He purified them. The king then ruled over the entire world, and the entire world returned to God, devoting itself solely to Torah study and prayer, repentance and good deeds. Devoting itself solely to Torah study and prayer, repentance and good deeds. Amen. May it be His will. Blessed is God forever. Amen and amen. The verse states that God has an oven in one place and fire in a different place, distant from the oven. Thus says God, who has a fire in Sion and an oven in Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. This entire chapter there speaks about this story. The entire chapter there speaks about this story. Woe to those who descend to Egypt for assistance and rely on horses. The Egyptians are humans and not gods. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. This alludes to the country that relied on the other wealthy country to save them. For according to the mistaken beliefs, they considered them gods. Their horses correspond to the angels in the story. Their horses correspond to the angels in the story. This is why the verse concludes, their horses are flesh and not spirit. Understand this. God will stretch out His hand. The helper will fail, and the helped will fall. Together they will perish. This alludes to the hand. For on the hand they saw that both would perish, as the lion and tiger roar over their prey. When all the shepherds scream at it, like birds flying. These alludes to the lion and the birds in the story. Understand this, for on that day each person will detest his gods of silver and gods of gold. Assyria will fall with the sword, not by man. Flee from the sword. Its walk will disappear on account of dread. These are the three categories of the sword in the story. Fall and flee are two powers, and its rock will disappear on account of dread. Corresponds to emaciation. In that one, strength and power disappear. Walk represents strength. These are the three powers of the sword. Study this well and understand. Finally, the verse concludes, thus says God, who has a fire in Sion and an oven in Jerusalem. These are the oven and fire in the story. Look and see and understand how this chapter explains the entire story. And all the above were the Rebbe's words. The Rebbe said explicitly that the entire story is alluded to in that chapter in Isaiah, and that all details of the story can be found in verses. For instance, you shall render as impure the plating of your silver idols and the jewelry on your golden images. You will cast them away like a defiled object. Get out of here, you will say to it. And in another verse, on that day each person will cast away his gods of silver and his gods of gold, digging ditches to enter into the crevices of rocks. In other words, they will cast away the lust for money, which is literally idolatry, and bury themselves in ditches, as told in the story, because money stinks like human excrements. Literally as written, you will cast them away like a defiled object. Get out of here. You will say to it, in this and other such verses, one can find the entire story, but the essence of this story is in the above chapter. For there it is all alluded to. However, we do not know how, beyond what the Rebbe unveiled above, he did not merit understanding how. The other details of the story are alluded to in that chapter, but he stated explicitly that the entire story is alluded to there. The proper order of the king and his man is as follows: the master of prayer, the warrior, the treasurer, the sage, the orator, the faithful friend, the princess and her son, the king and the queen. This is the proper order corresponding to the world of rectification. They represent 10 concepts, but they are not in order. That is, these 10 are not reckoned in the story in the order explained in Kabbalistic texts. There is a hidden meaning in this. It is also explained in the Kabbalistic literature that when the influence of one attribute passes through another attribute and tarries there, it is called after her that attribute. In other words, the attribute in which is tarrying the influence of another attribute that is passing through that attribute is called after the attribute from which that influence is coming. For these reasons, the order here is changed. There are points as well that will be understood by the adept in the Kabbalistic literature. The Rebbe said all this explicitly, and I understood from his words that the death of the kings and the rectification is also alluded to in this story. Although these 10 categories were not reckoned in order, neither in destruction or in rectification, for the same above reasons, but yet. For the same above reasons, but yet it all remains hidden and sealed. The actual secret of the story he did not yet reveal at all. Or he only enlightened our eyes with a few verses and ideas, so that we know that there are great and very awesome secrets in this story, but we have no idea. Fortunate is the one who merits understanding a bit of the secrets of these stories presented in this book. They are all extremely wondrous and awesome novelties, deep. Who can understand them? What can we say? What is there to say? Who has ever heard or saw the likes of this? Only the 7 beggars, I will tell you how people once rejoiced. There was once a king who had an only son. The king, There was once a king who had an only son. The king wanted to transfer the kingdom to his son during his lifetime, so he made a banquet. And of course, whenever the king makes a banquet, it is a very joyous affair, especially on this occasion where he is transferring the kingdom to his son during his lifetime, and it was certainly an extremely joyous affair. Nach, nachman. You want to come to the forest? Yeah. Leaving now if you want.